Let's start with the fact that good is a relative concept. Although over the last few years we have been supported by something else. Machines are easier to control. Just as there is no one truth, there is no one good either. It is not without reason that we say that the truth was in the middle. We bend the world to our views. What's good for me may not be good for you, but today about a completely different good. Very devious, she always had flip-flops bigger than a harness horse. Maybe that's why my mother loves her so much. Until the mask falls off and she finds out that my beloved goddaughter, better daughter, is more screwed in the head than her biological one, and certainly not for me in her old age. There is no greater egocentric on the European continent. This woman is a lawyer by profession and claims that there are no illegal immigrants in Europe because it is against the law. No, they wouldn't hire her in GRU, because you had to think there, but in Stasi they did. There were those who listened to parents' denunciations about their own children and people, in accordance with patriotism, did it very often. As they tell you to do. Saint Augustine combined the views of the Stoics and Plato and incorporated them both into the Christian system of ethics. He taught that whatever exists, if it exists, is good. In other words, good is what is, and evil is what is not in good. According to him, the world, as God's work, is good. Good exists objectively and is equivalent to God's will, while evil objectively does not exist and is only a lack of good. Exactly. Augustine did his best to remove Lucifer. He had such a task. Gnosis was born in his time. But it doesn't change it that evil exists. There are also questions, since God wills evil? What exactly is this lack of good if not evil? Yes, Lucifer isn't bad at all. He's more human than anyone in the Bible except humans. He's still an angel of justice. And he does measure it. Of course, today we will be analyzing this Luciferian greatest good. St. Thomas Aquinas defines the good as what is desirable, Latin bonum est id quod est appetibile. It emphasizes the intrinsic value of the good. The basis of good is the perfection of being, therefore something is desirable, because it is good, and good because it is perfect. The degree of goodness depends on the degree of perfection. Good directs action and influences the entire sphere of human activity, because it is the object and goal of desire, so that the basic doctrinaires of Catholicism and the Western churches. However, the Eastern Church did not remove evil and had other views on it, which also reached Europe, but the meaning later. It probably came from India. Arthashastra is the first policy elementary book created by Chanakya Kautilya, less often by Vishnugupta. He is the advisor of Chandragupta Maurya himself, Ashok's grandfather. That Ashok who has mastered the art of the higher good to perfection. That's right, Chandragupta Maurya fought with Sikandar the Great. It was Kautilya who first mentioned such a thing as the higher good in his treatises. The greater good has taken root in both Western and Eastern politics for good. In the West, Machiavelli described it, but he did not invent the concept himself. He was a Florentine, so he had trade contacts with Byzantium, mainly in matters of slaves. Ypres de Medici traded people and had their slaves. Probably thanks to contacts with Byzantium, which was already under the rule of the Ottoman dynasty, Machiavelli recognized this concept. Of course, the book, The Prince, an elementary book of political science. It describes the biography of Cesare Borgia, and let's not forget that he lived under the same roof with the fugitive Prince Jem. He mastered the principles of the greater good perfectly. He, as greater good. He had every chance to unite Italy, but the princes, who were mainly condottieri, would have had nothing to do thanks united, because they made their living from wars on the peninsula. The higher good exists in religion, although it is currently ignored by theologians or church hierarchs. Rather by fanatics, mainly those from Eastern Europe or the Balkans, which always have to mess up. There, indeed, slogans are shouted about, just war. But I have the impression, when I listen to these people, that they do not fully understand what this just war is. Translations can always be bad. Bekaui, to be honest, those who translated Bible had any idea about original language or even Old Greek, but that's really not knowing. A just war is actually a defensive war. Someone has to invade you to declare a just war. Not the other way. On the other hand, it is the time of the Crusades. Rightly passed. They have distorted this notion. You know, however, the Bible is a thick book, and it has small letters. Better to throw a catchword. Generally, there is no political elite now. Except for two gentlemen. This is the problem. I have always been of the same opinion as Deschades. Man serves. I'd rather serve under one purebred lion than 250 rats. Of course, Deschades was referring to Aristotle and Plato. A lion must be assumed to be mentally healthy. Otherwise, as with rats, it ends in tragedy. Indeed, many philosophers have developed this thesis. The hierarchy of the state and human life is unfortunately such and not otherwise. People don't even realize it, but they're not free. They sacrificed this freedom for the state and, in fact, for the family. If they were completely free to do whatever they wanted, the world would be anarchy. Children do what their parents tell them to do. This is the greater good as well. Don't touch the iron or you'll get burnt. The best thing would be to leave the iron on and wait for kid to get burned, but most will rather listen. Parents have their methods. They should have it, otherwise let them not count on having contact with a child in their old age if they create a selfish weed. When power is weak, she doesn't want a strong family. The reason is simple. Handling systems are then quite mediocre. A man with good family relations will not be as easy to manipulate as the one who is tossed into state institutions and had bad relations in home, had anyone in home to speak about problems. From the beginning, he was brainwashed by school. The first tool of power, unfortunately, very politicized since Second World War, and now all these personal trainers, even for sex. A man with good roots will not be so easily drawn into this trend. That is why the authorities now care so much about overthrowing all values, from family to religion. Because they are afraid that there will be someone smarter and will unglue them from their stools. They are weak in fact. Machiavellism became a symbol of perfidy, hypocrisy and revenge. However, it is still the basic elementary book of all schools which teaching politic science. For a simple reason. These methods continue to be used. We will hear from many psychologists, especially those who are paid by the government, that this is not a moral attitude. The question is, what is morality really, because it is a standard imposed on us artificially. Over the centuries, we have strayed so far from human nature that scientists today have a problem determining what it is. Machiavelli calls a spade and doesn't judge an act, and that's what irritates people in his book. Machiavelli states directly, politics has nothing to do with morality or immorality, politics is politics. This is the holy truth. It's a separate creation, balancing on the edge of everything to achieve the goal. Why? Because to be a politician you have to be something of a sociopath. Machiavelli had no influence on the politics of Suleiman the Magnificent and his descendants. Yes, Suleiman knew the book, but it is Machiavelli who draws from this system of power, not the other way around. The dedication is misleading because the book is dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici, but the hero of the book is Cesare Borgia. Machiavelli wants to show the loser from Florence how to rule in order to maintain power, and not lose it all the time. The Borgias are alive and still present in politics. De' Medici, well, certainly not the family of Lorenzo il Magnifico, whom everyone tries to whitewash and forget to add that he was syphilitic, and very brutal, thanks to the disease and he knowingly infected his wife with. At least he wasn't at her funeral. It was the family of Lorenzo il Vecchio that survived. Anyway, as the prophecy said. Unfortunately, in the series they killed him, and so they made Maria de' Medici by no means come into the world and give us Louis XIII. Machiavelli lived in a time of the greatest rulers of rulers. This is truly an extraordinary period in history, because in every part of the world we have a leader, not necessarily a king, who will go down in history and lay the foundations for the modern world. Never before or since in history have there been such outstanding historical figures at the same time. However, these characters used different methods to achieve their goals. Unfortunately, there are no such perfect leaders today. There are two, but not dozens. These people are Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Cesare Borgia, Fernando de Aragon, Isabella Cattolica, Henry VIII Tudor, Hurrem Sultan aka Roxeline, Suleiman Magnificent, Montezuma Coyotl, Maximilian von Habsburg, Ivan IV Terrible. This is Machiavelli, fascinated by the Koran and perhaps knowing Prince Jem, who said that only the armed prophets were victorious, the unarmed ended sadly. These famous words fall from his mouth. One cannot disagree when analyzing the fate of the prophets in history. One sentence from the prince: perjury is an offense against a private code of morality, but a state code of ethics does not. This is still valid, but with these words Machiavelli contradicts morality. No, he just calls things by their names. It shows that there are those in the world who do this and not otherwise, but it does not justify them, although it understands that at the moment, for the good of the state, they had to do something wrong. The prince is yang and yin. I think this is where the more sacred psychologists, especially those from the West, have a problem. They do not understand the principle that is in the Bible. Dualism exists. God is not at all merciful and merciless, on the contrary, he desires victims. Sometimes evil can turn into good even though it is bad. And however these people try to deny it, this is the way it is. Take, for example, the most brutal example from the prince, about the killing. Killing is still killing, even if we will call it nicer to the ear, it will be still the killing. Machiavelli explicitly refers here to the principle of the higher good, but he also stigmatizes human hypocrisy. When we change the name, something is no longer bad because we call it other way, although it didn't change nature. Hunting is killing. It sounds nicer to the ear, but then we kill. Sorry, that's true. This is not as well sport. This is still killing. If someone has killed many times, and we sentence him to death, then we are no different from the murderer. Machiavelli clearly emphasizes this. At the moment we are the same creature as the murder, there's any different between us, we do the same, but at the same time we save other people from death at the hands of this man. This is the greater good. This is the famous Luciferian higher good. We sacrifice someone. We are doing something wrong even if we have right for doing it, because maybe we are judge, or policeman. We are no different from that person in that moment, but that bad thing turn into something good for our society, for others. This is how we operate in countries, whether we like it or not. Something evil will be always evil, all tough that evil can rescue many lives. Often in the prefaces to The Prince, publishers write that Machiavelli does not take into account the contemporary values of the state, the moral authority of the state. There will be no state that does not have something on its conscience, respect for the rights of the individual, contrary to appearances, it is as long as it is convenient for the country. The so-called pandemic revealed its best that it doesn't exist, though people believed it has been. And that's it. Do everything so that the people think that they want it and come up with it. Social welfare, well, sorry, but under socialism it was also for the chosen. In capitalism is always for chosen. Indeed, only in the head of Jesus it existed. The rich were bound and poverty scattered. Bad news for those who consider themselves capitalists and believe in Jesus. This is the slogan from the oldest religious song. Jesus was the first and last communist. Communism has never been introduced in any country, although the terms are used interchangeably. Socialism was. Sometimes I have the impression that those who shout at Machiavelli are either crazy idealists or have no idea how states work. The legal system of states is the most perfect example of what Machiavelli is talking about. However, by taking away a drunkard's license or imprisoning him, we save society from him. But it is not nice or good thing. Of course, the state often saves itself. Suppression of protests. It's Machiavellism. It shows that there is no freedom of speech. The state suppresses the protest because it is afraid that in extreme cases it may overthrow the government. It overthrown many times. Such the most extreme examples of hypocrisy of that time was certainly the referendum on the separation of parts of Spain. Although the referendum was won, the authorities did everything to make it illegal and even got rid of the originators wearing clean gloves. The so-called pandemic has also revealed that the European Union idea simply not work. When Otto von Habsburg created it with several other leaders, he assumed that in such situations that the states in this structure would act together and cooperate. They didn't work together. The Germans quickly closed the borders. Literally like during World War II. It was enough to write typhus on the door and they did not enter. They didn't let in even long-term employees from the Union, and then they effectively discouraged it with paperwork. States did not cooperate. However, they were great at analyzing whether a tomato is a fruit or not, and Spain even managed to kill a dog that hadn't been infected in fact and introduce zoophilia. Oh, the legendary country of Christian leaders. They also did not help the overburdened countries of Eastern Europe when the wave of refugees from Ukraine was coming. They used the excuse that Ukrainians do not have proper vaccinations. Because only the vaccines manufactured by the unions were good, although they might not have been, but the money from their production remained in the EU's coffers. But now they are asking these countries to take people from Africa with whom they have problems. So it shouldn't surprising that some of these countries are outraged. What counted was their own good, not the common good. Those who are interested about Ukraine is also these have signed huge contracts for reconstruction damaged places, those who even clean their warehouses of old military equipment, those who want cheap flour for bread, which will then be thrown away, because there is overproduction, but the shelves must be full goods. I'm sure that Germany would very soon close the border to the citizens of Eastern Europe who are in the EU, if the Russian side approaches their borders. The union does not meet the assumptions of the founding fathers, became a deceit. Even border controls have been reintroduced. This showed that the idea that guided the founders of this artificial creation was lost. There is only one problem with the greater good. Even Machiavelli did not consider the greater good in the idea of murdering for fun. The condottieri were highly qualified commanders. In fact, the Italy of his time was one big mercenary business. Men are engaged either in usury or in warfare. No bank is usury, nothing will change that. The name of the bank is nicer, but they are usurers whom Christians have accepted. They increase it, because in Muslim countries they can't give interest on credit, because everything is usury there, so they increase it, because not everything here. They have to catch up somewhere. Mercenaries were valuable. They were valued. In the 20th century, we started killing for fun. This was not recognized by the greater good. And what's worse, we continue to murder for base motives and for fun. As we mentioned in the previous post, you can pray to Lucifer, he is the angel of justice. One can pray for the deliverance of Lucifer, for in this way the evil will supposedly disappear. And you can pray to Lucifer to turn evil into good. Dogmas. Already from Catholics you will hear different opinions on this subject. Protestants will crow because they have literally got bogged down in dogma. They tried to clean so much that they got even more dirty, but the purest dogma is this. I never say I believe it or not. Pure knowledge. Well, that's the problem, and that's internet knowledge. The author has not understood the greater good and is misleading from the beginning. The first to analyze this was Kautilya, not Democritus. His student Aristotle saw the highest good in happiness achieved thanks to the perfection of the individual, acting with dignity and virtuousness. This is the greatest virtue of human nature in the philosophical current. It is something completely different from the greater good we are talking about, of the religious and political trend, although it is sometimes called that. As we mentioned earlier, religion had an impact on politics, it is a philosophy and also a way of life. It can't be separated that easily. Machiavelli was religious, he was even an ambassador to the church estate. In his own way. In his era for sure it was something different. Nowadays it wouldn't be something strange. He also knew the law of the Sultanate very well, which hardly anyone remembers. Machiavelli is a bit like a person with Asperger's. Today, every handicap must have a difficult name. He can't lie, there is only one problem with the greater good. Even Machiavelli did not consider the greater good in the idea of murdering for fun. The condottieri were highly qualified commanders. In fact, the Italy of his time was one big mercenary business. Men are engaged either in usury or in warfare. No bank is usury, nothing will change that. The name of the bank is nicer, but they are usurers whom Christians have accepted. They increase it, because in Muslim countries they can't give interest on credit, because everything is usury there, so they increase it, because not everything here. They have to catch up somewhere. Mercenaries were valuable. They were valued. In the 20th century, we started killing for fun. This was not recognized by the greater good. And what's worse, we continue to murder for base motives and for fun. As we mentioned in the previous post, you can pray to Lucifer, he is the angel of justice. One can pray for the deliverance of Lucifer, for in this way the evil will supposedly disappear. And you can pray to Lucifer to turn evil into good. Dogmas. Already from Catholics you will hear different opinions on this subject. Protestants will crow because they have literally got bogged down in dogma. They tried to clean so much that they got even more dirty, but the purest dogma is this. I never say I believe it or not. Pure knowledge. Immanuel Kant created an ethical system, called activist, in which goodness became one of the basic categories of the practical mind. For Kant, the good did not exist as an objectively existing entity, but was a value that appears at the moment of conscious decision-making, and is therefore related to free will. Involuntary, automatic, actions, such as plant growth or breathing, cannot be judged in terms of right or wrong, because there is no will factor in them. Good and evil, as a category of evaluation of deeds, can appear only when a given action is undertaken of free will. The difference between good and bad action results from its relation to duty, i.e., the external system of values usually imposed by society. Good actions are those that fulfill duty, and bad actions are those that contradict duty. This view settled in European philosophy, displacing the old Platonic notion of the good from most ethical systems created after Kant. In Kant's system, however, there was still the possibility of a simple distinction between good and evil, thanks to the fact that he defined duty as an obligation to act in accordance with the will of God and the general order of the world resulting from this will. That's right, the man who established European law. He said the same thing as Machiavelli, but he put it in words that were more pleasant to the ear. He also noted that what the state imposes on us does not have to be in line with human nature. Social norms were even in his time religious norms. Though that was starting to change. He can be accused of equating good with duty. Sometimes we go to work that is not good for us, but we have to in order to survive. Even though it is a duty, it reflects badly on us. Duty is not always good. Soldiers on the battlefield kill, it's their duty, but is it good? No, because it's still killing. It doesn't matter why they do it and what theory the state chooses to justify it. They killing. An extreme example, but showing the error of this thesis. No, history is written by the victors. First the war must be won, and then even if the behavior was wicked, the elementary books of this country will record that it was an honorable war. God forgives but does not forget. Really, then how to explain Longinus? He only wanted to help his mother. Isaac is also very hard to explain. Even if it's just a reference to Canaan religious practices. Law is not justice. They don't have to go hand in hand. Perhaps the best quote to end this topic is a quote from the author Sir Terry Pratchett. It's Israel's granddaughter dialogue. With your grandfather. Hogfather. Now tell me, what would have happened if I wouldn't save him? Then sun would not have risen. Then what would happen? The Mirapole of flaming gas would have an illuminated world. All right. I'm not stupid. You are saying human need fantasy to make life betterable? No, humans need fantasy to be human, to be in place where fallen angels meets rising ape. With fairies, hogfathers, saints? Yes. That's practice you have to star up learning to believe little lies. So we can live big once? Yes, justice, mercy, duty, that sort of things. That's not the same at all. You think so, then take the universe and grind it down to the thinnest powder, sieved it to the thinnest sieve. And then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy, and yet you try to activate that as some ideal order in the world, as if there is some rightness in the universe, by which it may be judged. But people have got to believe in that. That's a point. You need to believe in things that are untrue. How else can there become? It's a perfect dialogue. A contemporary description of the thoughts of the greatest skeptic of the Enlightenment. Voltaire. He is the one who states that he cannot imagine that the world would not have a watchmaker who wound it, although he left it. Correct. It is he who states that, if there was no God, we would have to invent him. If only to blame someone for all the filth that people do to each other. That's right, and then if we really want to believe in a good God, we have to invent a bad one. An atheist is also a believer. He believes that there is no God and he doesn't even know it, or worse, rationalism, which is hard to find in human nature. As Einstein said, stupidity is a human disease. I haven't met it in the animal world. Me neither for the whole quarter of a century, but I still see a circle of stupidity among people. Whole time same mistakes. We never learn on others' mistake nor from history. Of course science can be wrong. Science has only recently learned about evil, and it has taken over for good.